All right. Hey, everybody. I'm not going to do the big introduction again, but just to say that we've got Pete here with us today. We're going to have a nice session with him. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I was just talking some logistics. If you're out there in the audience with us live, please put your questions in the question box and ask anything. There's not a stupid question. Everything is valid. And put where you're at in the world. And other people have already started to do this. We got BC, Canada, Hancock, Michigan, and I'm sure others will put in a lot more here as we get going. And then also, if you ever have a problem with the volume or anything else, put that in the Q&A box. I'm going to tell you right now, look at the PDF that's available at the end. Don't open it, because that's his presentation that he's going to do right now.
Surprise.
But you can have that later. I think he's going to give out his website later. He's got some links that he's going to want you to get to. We'll make sure we put those on there. Mark is there helping us with everything. And so we're just going to get going. So Pete, tell us about where, kind of where you hang out most of the time, not in Stillwater, but out on a farming situation. Are you in the city? Where do you spend most of your days?
Yeah, well, right now I am home I live on a blueberry farm called Blueberry Fields of Stillwater. You can find it on Google Maps. I'm not shy about it. So there's 2 acres of blueberries here. I rent the lower half of the farmhouse, and I help out with that operation seasonally. We got a couple ponds, a couple horses, some beautiful pollinator prairies out here. I spend a lot of my time lately along the roadsides around here. The wild plums are in season, as well as the wild grapes. I've got a picture, my friend Darren and I, he's also the guitarist in our band. I'm a musician as well. We took like a 25-foot ladder, put it up against an amber maple, and we're picking all these grapes last weekend. And so I got a bunch of stuff after we get off the call tonight, I'm going to be putting some plums in the dehydrator and getting all that stuff packed up. And I'm so big on wild edibles. I have been for a long time, but I just really started actually using a lot of them, like purslane and wild amaranth, and I haven't had to buy much of my own produce in the last 2 or 3 months because I have a vegetable garden and I've got all this abundant, these wild areas around me. So really love interacting with the landscape in that way, and this ethos of conservation through use is really important to me, rather than granted, a lot of our parks, you're not supposed to harvest plants and such. You can harvest fungi around me and fruit, but I like to stay within the bounds of that when necessary. But rather than having our landscapes become more of a museum, or some of this mindset of it's too much maintenance to have an edible garden or whatever, I'm all about, let's just get out there, let's get dirty, and let's interact with the landscape with our hands, with our senses. So it's been a really beautiful past summer because I've just been immersing in that way of being.
By the way, if you haven't already, and Mark, you're going to correct me and give me the right number, but I think a lady named Kate Armstrong, who lives here in the Denver area, has done 4 presentations with us. She's an urban forager. And
cool.
She has been out at my ranch and probably, I'm going to make a little guess, but shown groups. So she comes out here live, and then we video that, and then we've got videos with her live. I think just on my little ranch, which is only 45 acres, I have some other property that I lease, but over 100 edible plants, wild plants.
Wow.
And I'm so convinced that even though we do market farming also, I'm convinced that I could live off the protein of the fish I have in my ponds and all the other needs, fats, carbohydrates, off of just the wild flora that we have here on our property. How big are your wild plums? Mine get to be about this big. Do yours get bigger than that, or are they in that range?
Can you give me a measurement, because your video is actually frozen on my screen?
Of 3/4 of an inch in diameter.
Okay, so I picked some that were about golf ball size recently that are very sweet. They range from 1/2 inch, 3/4 to 1.5 inch diameter.
We lose most of our big ones to the birds, I think.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
I'm just collecting windfall when I'm out there. It's all just sitting on the ground, and they stay good for 2 or 3 days easily.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah.
So tell us about family, sort of let's start back and tell us how you were raised, parents and
Nice.
such, siblings, and then any other family now, significant other, kids, or anything of that like that.
Yeah, I appreciate this so much. So I live 15 minutes away from my parents. My mom and dad live in the same house that I grew up in. It's on like 3¼ acres. We have a big vegetable garden there together, which is great because in this era of the pandemic, my mom has Parkinson's. She's actually doing super well. She does like 6 exercise classes a week. She's crazy active. Um, and so but it's been cool to be, since she's in a at-risk population for COVID, to be able to hang out with them outside and garden together. And I meet up with her and get like a grocery bag full of produce when I can't make it over there. There's so much going on, so much coming in. And my sister and her husband, they live in another town called Woodbury, 20 minutes away. So I moved back here after 10 years of living in the Upper Peninsula, Lower Peninsula of Michigan. I lived in Houghton, Michigan, right across the canal from Hancock. I think I know this Alicia Rose. And moved to Oregon, was designing edible landscapes out there. Moved to Florida, was doing edible landscaping down there. Came back up here, and so I have a small immediate family. I actually just started dating an amazing, amazing woman. We share a deep love of wilderness, and especially the Boundary Waters wilderness on the border of Canada. Beautiful 1,000,000-acre national park, Voyageurs National Park. So we've been really bonding over that, bonding over food. I love cooking so much. This huge place behind me, I'm so blessed. This is only part of my apartment here. I've got a huge kitchen. There's a big music studio. Our band comes over. I'm in a band with 2 high school friends and another friend who I met at the local food co-op. He does marketing there. He plays bass. So I've got this beautiful life here after traveling around for so long, like a decade kind of. I've loved everywhere I live, everywhere I've lived. But this is definitely home. And I thought that in moving back to my hometown, I might feel kind of confined, and maybe confined not only physically in terms of wanderlust, but confined in the sense that I had this perception that if people who had known me in the past were around me all the time, that would somehow thwart my growth or something. But it's actually been quite the opposite. In rooting into this place, I found that my life has unfolded and evolved in really, truly phenomenal ways, to have that stability and have that tighter knit community. And that's something that is becoming so deeply important to me, is just that quality time with other people, the in-person time. I have so many friends around the world that I keep in touch with on social media. But man, that in-person stuff, and that's one reason why I got into the elderberry work, is because I was doing so much online work. I was coaching landscape designers in their business. I still do that a little bit. But I have a edible and native landscape design business, and then this elderberry is a natural progression for me from that. But I get to work in person with a lot of people, get to be on the ground, and just seeing like what happens, for example, on the farm here when I plant 12 elderberry plants, or what's it like to go out if I wake up at 2 in the morning and hang out with the horses for a while. It's just it's been really beautiful, just really opening up to immerse in this place, in this region that I was raised in and have come back to with new eyes.
Very cool.
Thank you.
On a little more somber subject, you mentioned it. How has the pandemic affected you in your business and your life? What kinds of things are you doing differently?
Yeah, well, my landscape design business increased in the amount of inquiries I was getting for people. People are at home and they're wanting to grow more of their own food, create pollinator habitats, stuff like that. So that's actually increased, and I recognize how unusual that is in this time, especially when there are a lot of people without a home. So for various reasons, either the pandemic or California fires, whatnot. So I would say that although my business has increased, I've become so much more aware of and really able to um, just feel real gratitude. I used to feel kind of scared. It sounds strange maybe, but I used to be kind of scared to feel gratitude. Maybe it's the human condition, I think, because I was afraid that, well, if I really feel this, maybe it'll go away or something. But I've found so many reasons to be grateful because of the pandemic going on. And I was just talking with Mark before we started this broadcast that, I mean, I live on a 20-acre property in a fairly small town on the edge of a big city, so I know what's going on in the city. I go in there sometimes. The whole George Floyd killing happened 20 miles away from me, so that's been going on too. And like I've had friends whose their house was surrounded by 3 burning buildings, and there's a lot of stories like that. And so there's some very real stuff going on. And I know that, so another reason why I got into perennial fruits, I'm also getting into hazelnuts too, but I just love elderberry. I gave a talk on elderberry for the local soil and water conservation district last October, and a woman came up to me and she said, "Hey, do you know anyone who might want to come live on this blueberry farm that I just bought?" And so I asked her some more questions, and I was like, I want to come see this. I need to see this place. So I came over here. It was like a mile from where I was living before, and I'm the type of person where I have a spiritual practice that just continually plugs me into serendipity, noticing the signs, the universe, God, destiny or whatnot. And so I knew that it's just been amazing how much the perennial crop world has put me in amazing situations, and how I know that I'm here at this farm to, one, learn and connect with people, with the land, but also to share this place. Um, so I've also just really started to look at how can I share more, how can I give more. I did have, although my business has been doing well, I had a lot of different uncertainties and fears coming up. I've been transitioning a lot of things in my life, focusing my career on music and elderberry now. And the pandemic has allowed me to move through some of those really deep fears about health and life and death. And like, I thought I had COVID at one time. I had chest pains. I got tested. I was negative. And I'm almost losing my train of thought because there's so much coming through, because it's such a provocative question. I've been able to confront some of those deeper fears. That's allowed me to just be like, you know what, we're going to just trust and test this out and just give and explore the true power of generosity. And there's some turkeys, a flock of turkeys on the land that are always leaving feathers around. So I'm always coming across these feathers. And one of the gifts of turkey is deep generosity, from some Native American spiritual traditions that I follow. And man, it's honestly been a magical time. It's not been easy, but it's been really beautiful.
Well, that was a heartfelt description. Thank you for that. One last question, then I'm going to let you go on your presentation. If we have time at the end, we'll do some more. Please, everybody, put your questions and comments in. It's cool that maybe you know Alicia. She's really good about putting in references and things for us. And by the way, just a quick question. How far is Hancock, or is it anywhere near Petoskey? I spent some time in Petoskey, Michigan, so I was curious where that.
If it's the same Hancock, I'm thinking of, the one I'm familiar with doesn't have a D in the name, and it's across a shipping canal from Houghton, Michigan, which is in the Keweenaw Peninsula, in the upper peninsula of Michigan. And Petoskey's, I don't remember which side. I think is it northwestern Michigan on the shore?
It's
Lower
right on
Michigan?
the lake, yeah, and it's not too far from the UP. So it's where the largest veneer mill in the world is. A lot of forestry practice in that area.
Yeah, it's still about an 8-hour drive from the Hancock I'm thinking of.
Okay. One last question before we move on to the presentation, which is in your band situation.
Yeah.
You might have said, and I missed it, what do you play? Or are you a multi-talented musician?
I am a multi-talented musician. So I sing and I play rhythm guitar. I do some solos depending on if I wrote a solo for the song. It's interesting because for me and guitar, I've been playing for probably 18 years but I've never learned my scales. I just have tried things out and come up with chords. I know some, but I don't solo the way somebody would, move around. So Darren does those types of improv solos, at least right now, and he's just amazing at coming up with very cool licks. But I'm the lead singer. I have dreams all the time with songs in them. So about a week ago, I had a dream with Cat Stevens, who's now known as Yusuf Islam, was in a dream of mine. And I woke up about 5 a.m. I was sleeping out in my tent here at the farm. And this song was in my head, and I was about to just doze off, and I probably would have forgotten it. But I just realized, oh man, that's an original song. And so I came inside it, I got my phone out, just did a little like yawning, super tired voice memo, and then picked it up again that next morning. And now it's been fleshed out into a whole song. So I'm moving very quickly through the songwriting process now, and it's really been a wonderful experience learning to channel in that way. So I do a lot of the initial structure songwriting, but the whole band comes together and really puts that final feeling on it.
Oh, go ahead. Keep going.
So we have like kind of a heavier sound as one side of us. It's like kind of heavier, harder blues rock. But then a friend of ours gave us his 12-string guitar, and we've got a banjo and mandolin now, and some hand percussion and stuff. So we've got this whole acoustic side. So we're starting, So we're starting to do some outdoor shows at like land cooperatives and farms in the area. It's super fun.
By the way, so two people that I have a really close alliance with in my life. One of them's right here. Are both musicians. Mark plays drums. One of the top, probably, rock/pop drummers in Bangladesh. Actually.
Wow.
National stuff. Yeah.
Wayne is probably he's exaggerating a little bit.
No, I'm not. And then the second one, who is not too far from you, and he is very prominent in regenerative, restorative agriculture. I'm going to let you guess. You know who I'm talking about? And he's done a lot with us here on the EAT community, and he has been a business partner of mine. So do you know who I'm talking about?
Oh my gosh.
And he writes original music too. So
Mark Shepard?
Mark Shepard, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Mark's a very cool musician.
Yeah, he's super fun. I get to see him at the Moses Organic Conference in the winters.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a great. I think he was playing banjo last time I saw him play.
Yeah, he's like you. I think he learned everything by ear, and he
I can see that.
He can play just about anything. So let's transition. My computer's telling me turn off webcams. My computer is overloaded. I don't think. Are you guys hearing me all right, Mark? Am I coming through?
I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, your webcam seems to be frozen.
Yeah.
For a bit.
Very expressive.
I might turn off my webcam. I just turned I turned them all off. I'm going to turn it. Mark, turn back on Pete's. I turned it off accidentally.
Actually, he's showing up on my end.
Oh, okay. So my screen just must be frozen totally. Anyway, that's not that important because it's a good time to transition to Pete. And why don't you take over the presentation here? Everybody think of questions because I want to get to them at the end. And then if we've got other questions, we can do them then. So
great.
Go for it, Pete. It's all yours.
Sounds good. And there will be plenty of fodder for questions as we go through. So if you're watching my video, you'll see me looking down. I've got a bunch of notes and only so much time. So I'll try to pace myself and not talk too fast. I'm happy to chat more with anybody afterwards and do a deeper dive at some point. So,
by the way, Pete, I'm going to mute myself, but before I do and you start, we have nothing scheduled after this. If you go a little long,
okay.
And as long as we've got people in the audience, most of our people that view this view through recording anyway, Shoot,
Yeah.
Elaine Ingham has gone how long, Mark? I think our longest Elaine Ingham was like 5 hours or something. It was a lot of questions, but don't worry about the time. Take your time, do it in the time frame that you feel good about. So.
All right, perfect. Sounds good. So the plant of the night, if not one of the plants of the decade, potentially, American black elderberry. This is Latin Sambucus nigra, variety canadensis. So it's thought that a lot of the elderberry plants are actually these kind of varietal subspecies of that Sambucus nigra, which is known as the European black elderberry. So this plant is a good fit for some, but not all small farmers. So by no means am I saying everybody should grow this, because there are obviously realities around that, right? A lot of different realities that I'll talk about. But this is a very profitable crop for the people who are growing it and managing it appropriately, can help bolster farm income, and really helping farm families potentially keep their land or keep their business thriving. And also that diversification is so important from an ecological side, also economic, and for rural communities, which I'm super passionate about helping out. So I'm going to do my best to give a broad overview while giving you some actionable information to move forward with here. But we'll start out with this kind of more zoomed out view of the elderberry. So there's 3 species that are widely grown commercially, both in the widest grown commercial species is our Sambucus nigra canadensis, which is the American black elderberry on the top left in North America. In Europe, it's Sambucus nigra, and I chose to put the flower of that plant there. Both widely grown around in their various regions of the world. We can grow nigra in the US here, but in more southern areas. And they're actually grown a lot differently, especially in Europe versus America. In Europe, it's really this industrial process where the nigra berries are boiled down to different pigments, dyes, and it's more of kind of industrial product. And people sometimes wonder, like growers in Europe will wonder, why are you growing that for medicine? It's a lot different. So it's interesting, because I always assumed that it was just the same deal. And on the bottom left, I'm really excited about this one. This is blue elderberry. If you're out west or in the northern Rockies, I'm sure there's more of a range than I really understand. In North America, our blue elderberry varietals, Cerulea, and this is a really great plant because it's I've never had it, but it is cold hardy. It tends to grow at higher elevations, often above 3,000 feet above sea level, but it's purported to have a better flavor than the American black elderberry. So if anyone knows that from their experience, definitely type that in the comments. So I'll be testing Cerulea next spring. It's got a pretty long cold stratification process that I'm going to start this month, and then we'll get it sprouted hopefully this next spring, and start working with some genetic diversity to see what we can do here in Minnesota with that one. So why this plant? This is the American black elderberry, Sambucus canadensis. The first piece, and you can see on this botanical plate here, I'm not sure what date, what era this particular plate's from, but there's such deep roots of human use for the elderberry. There have been sites in Switzerland where elderberry seeds found from 2000 BC. And so this plant has been used for a long time, of course, probably a lot longer than that, but it's actually thought that it's been cultivated at least since then. So pretty remarkable how deeply this plant's associated with human cultures. And the benefits of this plant, well, actually, I just want to point out that this is the range, which is pretty obvious, of Sambucus canadensis in North America. This doesn't mean this is the only place it'll grow, and it's not the only range that it will reliably produce a fruit harvest in. You can get a flower harvest even in far northern areas, and that is actually an in-demand commodity as well. But this is the main area, at least as far as maybe the like 2006 or something like that. Of course, our USDA growing zones are shifting, and we will see an expanded range as well. But latitude does come into play pretty importantly once you get above 45 degrees latitude for elderberry production. I'll talk about that a little more later. So this is Hippocrates, He wrote about elderberry as the medicine chest of the people. And what I really love about this plant is that it's so accessible. You don't have to have some crazy patented extraction process or super expensive machinery or whatnot to be able to actually get the full benefit of this plant. In fact, you can obviously put the berries or the flowers in teas or other elixirs or foods, a lot of different things that I'll talk about tonight. So this is already quite well known. This has been used for thousands of years. And what I really love is that we're putting the power back in the hands of people for their preventative medicine. So I always love talking about some peer-reviewed stuff rather than all just saying, I love experiential wisdom and folk wisdom, but when it comes down to it, we need some peer-reviewed studies. So the influenza virus, this is really cool. So the immunotherapeutic properties of elderberry juice, it showed in this particular study that I'm referencing here that there were strong effects in reduction of the influenza virus spreading in the post-infection phase of these healthy cells. And the really cool thing about elderberry, the American elderberry, is that it can actually help prevent bacterial superinfection and pneumonia in influenza patients, which is a really common killer of people who have influenza. They get their immune system's weakened, they get this huge infection and the pneumonia, et cetera. I think that's how my great aunt died, actually. And so it has this cross antimicrobial action, both viral and bacterial, which is really cool. Hyperglycemia, so it was shown in this particular study, used rats, which are very similar genetically to humans, but it really helped to balance the blood sugar when it was going crazy, very high blood sugar in insulin resistant rats. So it does show some real benefits, the flowers as well, for people who may be at risk of diabetic shock. And also chemopreventive. I actually had to look this up because I was like, what aspects does this relate to cancer? But there was a study done both with European and American black elderberry that showed that both plants, fruits, exhibit anti-initiation and anti-promotion properties against cancer cells. So it can prevent the initiation of the spread of cancer and then promoting, which is huge. So these are some deeper aspects of the benefits of elderberry, not to mention all the people I talked to, and I'm sure that you've talked to, or maybe you have your own experience of using elderberry in the winter and you didn't get the flu, or you didn't get a cold, or your kid wasn't sick. So I talk to people all the time who are telling me stuff like that, and it's amazing. But this is great because this is shown in peer-reviewed studies across different disciplines, different journals, different health issues, that it's having some real benefit. So this is another thing. This is probably the most common question I get from people, I would say just from people who are generally going to consume elderberry in some way, is what about the fact that most common knowledge is telling us that we can't eat elderberry or that it has to be cooked. So there was a University of Missouri study and a presentation that you can find online that did some different analyses, which I won't get into the details of, but they tested Sambucus canadensis, Sambucus nigra, and apples. So that's the American, European elderberry and apples. And they actually found that apple juice was higher than cold pressed American elderberry juice in these cyanide precursors, these glycosides. So Sambucus nigra, the European elderberry, was significantly higher in these compounds than American. I personally drink a little bit at a time because it's so concentrated of American elderberry juice that's cold pressed from my friend Terry's group in Missouri, River Hills Harvest, and I'll talk about him later. But the cool thing about this is that with the American elderberry, it has been shown in some preliminary studies that it doesn't contain concerning levels of these glycosides. So I personally ingest the cold pressed elderberry juice. It has some amazing benefits. You can make up your own mind, but I wanted to put out there what I know about that. So why now? Why is this taking off? Why am I so excited about it? Because it's not just like I'm coming along with a crop that everybody's already growing and talking about and, you know, singing its praises. This is something that a lot more people than we might think are actually growing them. There are some really cool Facebook groups such as New Elderberry Growers. That's a great one if you're looking to learn more about getting started with elderberry. I'm active in that group, as well as a group for experienced growers called Elderberry Growers Connect. Both of them are full of amazing people. And while I don't have my own land with elderberry on it at this time, I'm helping some friends nearby. We just planted 1.5 acres at their place this year. And then we'll be putting in another 1.5 acres next year. So we're getting this stuff going, and there's already farms in my area that are doing it, and there probably are in yours as well. Just depends if you want to get on social media and find those people. But I'm so excited about this moment in history because a lot of the work has been done to get this stuff off the ground. Terry and then Chris from the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative have done some amazing things to get the awareness of American black elderberry out there. And it's obviously, you see in stores, the different products that are already being carried that use Sambucus nigra. But there's a lot of momentum, which I'll talk about more. So there's also a lot of really necessary options that people need to have in their tool belt to be able to make a good decision about, you know, being able to bring some real sustainable income back to our rural communities and back to small farms, maybe even back to farms who have gotten a little too big and need something extra to bolster their annual revenue. So I'm not saying that elderberry is going to solve everyone's problems. I'm not going to be the person to romanticize any of this, but as you well know, a lot of farm families, you know, the kids aren't coming back to the farm because there's no future in corn and soy. And I was working on generational land transfer at a group called Legacy Land Conservancy in Michigan in 2014. I spent the summer doing that, figuring out how can we help farmers diversify, how can we help existing farm families keep the farm in the land, or farm in the family, and help young farmers build equity in existing farm operations. And so, you know, I was working around all these different aspects of things, and that's really where some of these ideas got sparked. And then there's also this concept of economic colonialism, which was shared with me by a man named John Eichard through his writing, which I really like. He's based in Iowa now. He does sustainable farming writing, has some amazing books on small farm economics. And you know, this aspect of the fact that a lot of these rural communities, there isn't the, you know, people are moving away. We've got a lot of farms struggling, people losing their farm. Different businesses are going out of business because there aren't as many people. There's not enough tax base left over. And then we have these situations all around the country, especially in the Midwest that I'm familiar with, where big companies or some outside company comes in, puts a factory or whatever in the town, is there for a little while, pays people a super meager wage. It's kind of modern slavery in a way, although I don't want to get into that whole discussion because we'll just pretend I didn't say slavery, but pays people just a meager wage, and they're not being supported sustainably in their local economy. And then the company often moves away, goes international to get cheaper labor, et cetera. So this is just like this recurring cycle that John talks about so well in his writing. So creating hope, you know, real tangible hope and change is a snowball effect, and small parts add up. And so this is a viable option in the tool belt because it's one of those small pieces that can help add up in a really viable way. And I included this screenshot because on the right you can see these irrigation fittings, these PVC fittings. I was looking at check valves and stuff for a elderberry plant that I'll show you later. I just thought it was pretty funny. Google's totally got my number. So I was really inspired by this quote as well. You know, the days of the insular silo farm are over. So Chris here was talking about small scale vegetable farmers, especially going to farmers markets and all of the overhead, et cetera, that entails. Why can we not work in a more cooperative model again without a whole ton of bureaucracy as well? So farming was never meant to be this insular operation where we're all kind of doing our own thing. We all have to have our own equipment. I mean, there's some realities that necessitate that in certain circumstances, but we have real collective power when we come together, of course. I'm preaching to the choir here, I'm sure, but elderberry is one catalyst that can really help to create some collective power in communities where people are interested in growing into something more than just a single farm. So I consult with a lot of individual farmers right now, because I'll talk about grower clusters later and having groups of farmers together to pool resources, experience, etc. But working with these individual farmers, my real goal is to help them connect with others in their area, and this becomes a ripple effect, because I can only do so much, we can all only do so much on our own from any really aspect as we approach it. So I'm super excited about this, because it is going to grow into something bigger, and the nature of elderberry farming, which I'll discuss more, really allows this type of community base to happen and become just a long-term active phenomenon. So this is from UC Berkeley. I just really like this image, and preaching to the choir again, but wisely diversifying is so important, because we can't have these little one-off things that it's like somebody puts something in the ground, there's no market for it near them, it fails. And I think ultimately it's not so much about, let's say, it is about wasted time and energy and money, etc. But what it really comes down to is we need things that farmers can do on their land, or landowners who want to save the family farm or just be able to pay property taxes more easily, and to wisely diversify something that's viable, that has markets pretty much no matter where you are in the country, and into Canada as well. I'm talking about North America here because this is where I'm based. So economically, there are totally so many different markets that elderberry is demanded in. It's a very versatile crop for unpredictable cold and also heat. It's not like cherries or apples where you get a late cold snap and your crop's ruined. It's a super cold hardy crop. And like I said, I'm not saying like elderberry is the invincible thing. There are a lot of issues that can happen, but related to climate change, you saw that range from Georgia to Minnesota and beyond, and that's all the same species. Granted, they are climate adapted. There is environmental plasticity across that range, but it's really promising to see. And it's promising that people are getting harvestable, marketable crops across that range as well. Nutritionally, I just love the word nutraceutical. It's something that came up when I was doing some research for this talk. This is less domesticated nutrition than a lot of our crops. And I'm super excited about that as well, because while I haven't done a study that's been peer reviewed on elderberry, there have been some initial studies done, but it's really exciting to me to at least diversify the source of our nutrition, diversify the source of fruit and antioxidants, some of these amazing health benefits that come from just enjoying this crop that also happens to be good for our pockets when we're managing it properly, managing the crop properly, and good for the land. So there's so much demand for this crop right now. I'll talk about some of the demand, but the thing is that what I'll talk about tonight is it's just a portion of what the potential is. It's really just a drop in the bucket, because this is just starting. So the demand is spread out nationally, with growth centers dispersed across North America. Chris Patton at the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative, who I'm affiliated with, you can find me on their website I'm listed as a consultant there, which is they're kind enough to do. This is promising on regional scales for logistics, for farmers to be able to get their finished product, whether it be berries, flowers, whatever, to market. So especially this aspect of bulk sales is something that I really focus on for startup elderberry farmers, because it's a safety net where they don't have to have existing infrastructure, experience, certifications, licensure, etc., to be able to make something happen for their bottom line. So the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative is short. In March, they were short over 30,000 pounds of elderberries, and I just emailed Chris yesterday to get updated numbers. he could sell 150,000 pounds of bulk frozen berries today if he had them, because he's getting calls all the time. And he and I did a talk in Wisconsin earlier this year, and he had to turn his phone off because he kept getting calls from people across the US, from California to Georgia to Massachusetts, who are either looking to start growing elderberries, or more so on Chris's end, they're really looking to buy bulk for wholesale. And I'll talk more about that later. This talk is packed with stuff. So to put that 150,000 pounds plus 30,000 into acreage numbers, that's about 100 acres worth of elderberry for just one cooperative, one product bulk frozen berries today. So 1 to 5 acres is the average farm size for elderberry. This isn't something you're going to really grow 20 acres of. You could try, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's intense. It's labor intensive, and it's equipment intensive to destem. But buyers around the nation are calling every day, and I'll get into that. But this isn't something farmers have to struggle to sell and build markets for. They're already established and growing rapidly, and especially in this age of the pandemic, farmers across the nation. I was talking with some people in Missouri who are selling their bulk fresh berries. The consumers are picking them up. Just home buyers who want to come and take it home and make their own syrup and stuff. They're getting $8 to $10 a pound, and at 2,000 to 2,500 pounds per acre of destemmed berries, the bottom end of consumer sales would be 16,000 gross per acre. And comparing that with a meager, in 2019, I think the soy prices farmers were getting per acre was like $400. So of course it's different growing elderberry versus soy, but especially if you can get your labor figured out cheaply, you can do really, really well. And if you were paying for labor, about 50% of your overall production cost is going to be, 50% of your revenue is going to be production costs, and then the profits on top of that. So this is a plant with multiple harvests too. It just keeps getting better and better. But we will bring it back down to earth too. So fruit, of course, the flowers, which come before the fruit, even on varieties which don't produce as many subsequent flowers. There's determinate and indeterminate varieties of elderberry. You can harvest the bottom 3 feet of flowers without adversely affecting berry production. And so people are selling the flowers for $30 a pound fresh. The fruit is going for anywhere from $2 to $5 a pound bulk frozen berries. That's depending who you sell them to. If you find your own buyer, or you go through Chris at the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative, he's been getting people $4 to $5 a pound lately for bulk frozen berries, especially if you're certified organic. But the cooperative, as well as River Hills Harvest in Missouri, they just make so much juice and other things. They buy a ton. They keep that a bottom threshold of $2 a pound. So farmers have a safety net no matter where they are in the country ultimately. Of course, there are logistics involved and extra costs with shipping. And when it comes down to it, it's more sustainable to get your own marketing set up in your area. However, the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative, I keep talking about them because they're working for growers. People aren't required to sell to them by being a member. It's just to help growers get going. And that's why I love it. It puts power back in the hands of the people. And that's why I fell in with Chris and Terry and all these people. And I'm sure you all are amazing yourselves. I just love the people who are attracted to elderberry. So cuttings, I put inspected here because most cuttings in elderberry cuttings for propagation in Minnesota are not inspected and certified for pests and disease, viral, bacterial, fungal, things like stem borers are all potential issues that could really hurt the industry, especially since a lot of these plants are selected from the wild, but they're propagated every year and have identical genetics in a lot of places. So really important to keep that hygiene good. Although if you are looking for different certified sources, I know people who sell that. But cuttings from your elderberry plants, let's say you have an acre of, oh my gosh, if you have an acre of elderberries that are 3 years old, you're going to start pruning those. It depends on the variety how you do that, but you're going to get $2 a cutting for selling that wholesale to a farmer who wants to plant their field. You could plant it in your field, expand your own, But then I also help local farms sell, a local nonprofit farm called the Main Street Project, sell cuttings for $3, $3 each to home buyers, which is a great deal for everybody. And you know, the farm, you're making a lot of money on these cuttings. Like you can make 8 to 10 grand a winter per acre. It's just it's just an amazing thing. So it's just so cool to have all these different products come, these different raw products. And I never mind, my timer just went off. But I'm going. So all these different raw products that you don't need to process that much, aside from destemming and packaging up for shipment or distribution to really get these sold. It's just a beautiful thing. And also, I have heard some pretty amazing stuff about the healing properties of the bark for healing different wounds and skin ailments on the human body. So really cool stuff. I don't know as much about that, so I'll share more about that later on, probably on my blog, on my website, as I learn more. So berries, getting deeper into each product here. So the bulk berries, this is a 4-gallon U-line pail, and that's what the berries are packed into for bulk frozen sales. Most commonly, you can fit 22 to 25 pounds per bucket in there, and you're selling it at, you know, from $2 to $5 a pound wholesale. And so this is River Hills Harvest here, the elderberry juice. This is the cold pressed elderberry juice. I believe it might be the only cold pressed juice in the nation right now. It's one of the few, and they make a lot of it, but they've been sold out since March. And so the current elderberry harvest is going to help with that some, but there's so much demand right now. So bulk and processed, that's only one of the processed products that can be made. And then we've also got consumer sales. So, you know, people who want to just take stuff home and make their own elderberry elixirs, syrups, etc. And so there's a lot of different ways in which you can get this stuff sold. Excuse me, the left and the far right, you really don't have to do that much beyond destemming and sanitizing, washing, and packing the berries. For the middle, you obviously have to have a little more elaborate, if not a lot more elaborate setup, but that's something that you could work into, or a farmer can work into over time. But that's also where these grower clusters come in, which I'm so excited about. And so we also have a lot of different uses for the flowers, especially some for the berries, like this elderberry wine that's made on a farm. They might actually contract somebody. I haven't talked to them yet. I'm also starting a podcast in elderberry. I'm pretty excited about, where I'm going to interview people. So I'm going to reach out to them, Elder Blossom View. But Saint Germain is probably the best known elderflower liqueur, which is a super, super popular drink. Distilleries around the nation, here in the Twin Cities, people are who run distilleries are asking for it to make elderflower liqueur. The American elderberry, the different varieties vary in their flower essence and potency, but I've heard multiple stories of people needing to use 3 or to reduce the recipes for European elderberry by 3 because the American elderberry flower can be so potently, you know, fragrant. And then we've got an elderflower EPA. You've probably heard of Summit Brewing Company. It is based, I think, in St. Paul, here in the Twin Cities. And, you know, even they're using this stuff. And Chris from the cooperative gets calls about this type of stuff all the time. So he's always looking for people to be able to to provide the flowers for these types of places. And so talking about the flowers, Chris also said that, I talk about him so much because he's one of the main brokers in the country. He takes a little bit of a percentage sometimes on these transactions, but he's just looking to help connect people because there's so much demand. One herbal company alone, he said yesterday, would buy 10,000 pounds of dried flowers today if they were available, and that's at $30 a pound. I think I said $30 a pound fresh before, but that's dried. So my apologies. But there's a gigantic market for this. So obviously we've got Nature's Way. You can find that stuff at Walgreens. You can find it at a lot of different things, at Whole Foods, your local food co-op, stuff like that. But you know, that's just the beginning, because I have friends down in Missouri, people around the country are making their own kind of cottage industry herbal medicine products that sell super, super well because it's so well known, the benefits of elderberry for the immune system. I've talked to people of all walks of life who are familiar with elderberry and like to use it. So these markets are also seeking, these wholesale markets are seeking high quality, sustainably grown flowers and berries. The cool thing about the herbal medicine world as well is that if you're doing a great job and growing a high quality product, that's really going to be rewarded in the marketplace as well. It's not, you're not just throwing it into, you're not throwing it into a distiller and making the liqueur, although of course the quality of the flowers matters there. But we have some ways in which to really start to distinguish the quality of the products being grown. So I recognize it's easy to romanticize all this stuff. There's a lot of really great sounding stuff. This is still, it's a perennial crop, but it's still work to plant and maintain. It's work to harvest and process it, but there's these amazing connections for selling. I'm not making any money off of anybody selling their berries, by the way. I do consult on this because I love it, but I just want to show you that there's real potential. So elderberry farming realities. This is a friend's farm, 6 acres in Missouri. Friend I met through Facebook, so he could be your friend too. He's a great guy. I won't mention his name because I didn't ask him if I could tell it. So the main things here, just some overall considerations, which I'll get into a little more, is this requires irrigation. This isn't something that you can just let sit out in the field. If you've got berries that are ripening and there's a drought, you're going to lose your harvest, and you have some idea of what that revenue could mean and what that lost revenue could mean on this scale when you're thinking like $10,000 an acre or potentially more. So it also often requires fencing. I worked with somebody in North Dakota recently who doesn't happen to have a lot of deer. We put a elderberry layout, which I'll show later, on kind of a peninsula, and they're not going to have a whole ton of issues, they don't think, with deer, but they could. Generally, other animals haven't seemed to be a huge issue. We do have issues with rabbits here with the blueberries. I'm curious how much that'll be an issue. Depends on the season, in the winter especially. But fencing can be important, and that in some cases might mean an 8-foot tall fence, might sometimes be kind of an angled fence. It depends kind of how you want to work that. There is some flexibility, but there are a number of pests and diseases. There's spotted winged Drosophila. If you're anywhere in North America, pretty much, you're probably familiar with that. It's pretty intense out in the Northwest. It's getting really intense here. We had it pretty bad at the blueberry farm this year. It's not that there aren't solutions for some of these. There are stem borers, and you cut out the diseased canes or the infested canes and burn them for those. There are different mechanical practices that you can do that you don't have to spray chemicals necessarily, but there are also different diseases, such as some viral issues that people keep posting about on Facebook, and a lot of different things that I haven't seen all of those in person because this is a pretty new crop in our area, especially at scale, and that's where we start to see some more of these outbreaks. So in the past, a lot of people thought, well, this doesn't have many issues, but there were a lot of people that were just kind of an island in an ocean of corn or something like that, which also brings up another thing I want to mention is the weather. And if there are high winds when the flowers are out like this, it can really wreck a crop potentially, especially if you're going for the flowers versus the berries. This is thought to be a mostly wind pollinated plant, by the way. Of course, drought can play an issue, but irrigation can help with that for sure. And chemical drift. So this particular farmer, the reason why I'm showing his fields, not only because it's beautiful, but he had some really intense, I believe it was herbicide drift earlier this year, and he didn't think he was going to get a crop. I think he probably got like 20% of the crop that he would have gotten otherwise, and he's surrounded by a lot of conventional agriculture in his area. So you can get hit with that, and it can be a really big deal. Granted, at least in this picture here, he doesn't have any screening of, say, poplars or something like that might otherwise help a little bit with drift, but it's not going to be we don't live in bubble domes, nor do I think we should. So we'll talk a little bit more about siting later on to find the best site for the elderberries. So there are some bottlenecks for sure. And where's my, okay. So in terms of where the labor is coming from, A lot of existing farm operations might not have it, but if, say, it's a small vegetable farm, or you got your family nearby, or a close connection with a local church, you got to make sure those connections are strong and that people are really committed to come by every few days to harvest and destem and pack, etc., when it comes to harvest time. But it can be figured out without having to necessarily hire a lot of expensive labor. Of course, giving people their due, doing a fair trade or whatnot. Destemming equipment, the destemmer that a lot of people are using these days costs about $8,000. The Midwest Elderberry Cooperative's gotten some grants to help people out a bit with cost for grower clusters. And that's why I talk a lot about sharing resources, because this equipment right now is pretty expensive. That being said, in just a couple years on an acre, you'd pay for that. Elderberry also comes into full production at 3 years, by the way. You don't have to wait a super long time. And centralized cold storage and distribution centers, there's some big funding that just came in for Savannah Institute that's based in southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois, and also the Elderberry Cooperative got some awesome funding to support supply chain logistics and get some centralized locations in the Twin Cities and Madison figured out. So we're also starting to see a little bit of activity in the University of Minnesota system with elderberry, but there's been a lot down in Missouri. So things are starting to happen in different spots. It doesn't mean that somebody can't get going in another area, but it really starts out with considering, is your site even going to work when it comes down to it? So I say the soils, the pH is ideally 5.5 to 6.5 for various nutrient availability reasons for elderberry, but I also know somebody who's in British Columbia on 7.9 pH soil, and he's mitigating that by adding Epsom salts. It seems to be helping him, but they've got a really successful farm. It's called Elderberry Grove, or at least it seems successful. I will be interviewing them to really see what's going on. Another piece is here, this soil on the left, it doesn't look terribly fertile. We didn't put down anything broadcast on this acreage. This is this 1.5 acres. And I wanted to show this picture because it's real. Like, this isn't a perfect looking thing. We're experimenting. The person who's actively managing this, I'm consulting on it, coming out every month or so. He's just been doing light tills between the rows this year because he planted pretty late. He's going to get some cover crop on there. And the cover crop that I often recommend is a dwarf perennial ryegrass with red clover, depending on where you're located. But the fertility needs are high for this crop. It does need additions of compost, and that's what I recommend before somebody even plants. Things like fish emulsion potentially, although there's some big questions with the sustainability of stuff like that. Feather meal, if you're near a chicken processing plant, different things can be used different times of year to help with that fertility and help keep production up, because it's super important. I've seen some people get really low harvest because they're not keeping fertility up. Soil texture, it's fairly versatile. I would say it's not going to work in super sandy soil, but other than that, as long as it's not waterlogged for lengths of time, elderberry is pretty versatile. Of course, full sun, a lot of people think black elderberry likes to grow in shade, and it can grow in shade, but it's not going to fruit for you. Our red elderberry, Sambucus, is it now Sambucus racemosa? I think it used to be pubens. Red elderberry does like shade, but that's not an edible berry. Latitude is also very important. So right here, if you can see my cursor, right where the Twin Cities are in Minnesota, is about 45 degrees latitude, and that's where we start to see issues with early frosts happening, where some elderberry varieties that are bred down or selected down in Oklahoma or Missouri, they're not going to produce as well up here because the frost cuts them off. So that's an important consideration. There are people farther north for sure growing elderberry, but you really got to know your varieties. Equipment needs. So in certain circumstances, such as this farm near me, the farmer, we decided to put down some black plastic. While I'm not a fan of plastic, it's a really, really helpful because it was already an accessible piece of equipment. And we're able to put that down in the rows for the first couple years, just to have that one layer down for a couple years, then we'll take it up and put down hardwood mulch over it. But depending on what you want to do, you definitely need a tractor or mower, a riding mower, depending on how large your area is. Mulching equipment such as a side mulcher. A lot of local Christmas tree farms may have that, local orchards, so you can look to your local community of farmers to potentially borrow stuff. Definitely need irrigation. A destemmer is necessary. You can just get these destemming screens if you've only got an acre, but there's a whole lot of shaking you got to do to get an acre's worth of elderberry destemmed, and I wouldn't personally want to do that. So the destemmer is an important thing, and that's where teaming up with other people can really help. There also are different grants available at the state level for sustainable farming operations, demonstration grants, things like that. So there are some possibilities there for funding. Also storage, so a freezer or a quick freeze processing facility are necessary to get these elderberries preserved, especially with spotted wing Drosophila, which can ruin fruit and turn it into mushy vinegar stuff. So this is the place in North Dakota. You can see there's a tree line on the north side. There is a fence row. It's just a cattle fence in between that vehicle entry road and this layout area. So fencing and irrigation, like I said, are important. This is the way that I'm currently laying out elderberry crop plans, 12-foot spacing on center between rows, north-south. We got drip tubing. In this case, it's pressure compensating because we're on a slope toward the lake. In this particular situation as well, the farm owner wanted to try and use the lake for irrigation pending proper permitting, which I always suggest. You don't never know if you can actually use a natural body of water, either because the state or local authority says you can't, or because you might be harming the local ecosystem. So, but this has a filter in the lake, suction hose or rigid PVC. It's got a auxiliary generator and pump. It's just actually, this is a lower capacity pump because this is only an acre right here, this phase 1. And phase 2 would use some likely transfer pumps to get water over to phase 2 and phase 3 eventually. So disc filter after the pump, just to make sure we're not getting algae in the lines, 1-inch main line, 1-inch sub main line, which will provide enough flow to this. So this is 16 millimeter drip tubing, or maybe it's 18. It's 0.62 inches, 5/8. So that's the basics of getting something set up. And plants, the cuttings are spaced every 2 to 3 feet within the row. There's some more considerations, but that'll give you some stuff to start thinking about here in terms of what it takes to put this stuff in. So on an acre, you're going to be putting in 800 to 1,000 cuttings, depending on your spacing. You can root out the cuttings before planting, but if you can get them in early in the ground early in the season, depending on what region you're in, when there's enough moisture in the ground, they can do just fine, and you can get 90% plus success rate on those cuttings. So in terms of the labor taking here, so they've got a homestead a little farther away. It's maybe like a quarter to half mile drive. So they're gonna be taking in stuff over there to get destemmed and everything. A little extra work, but they can get it all destemmed and sanitized, washed, packed, and frozen over there. And they have family who can help them with that. So for an acre, 2 people can take care of that fairly manageably. I'm not gonna say it's a breeze. You're gonna be working like a 10-hour day, but you can get that done with just a couple people. And I always recommend starting out with an acre. That's why we got a phase 1 and beyond here, because you can scale that up pretty accurately in terms of how much more work is this gonna take. How do we get our own process efficiently set up, because it's different for every property and each person's infrastructure that you've got. So family and friends, bartering or trading help. Hired help gets really expensive for this. So if you don't have good social capital in your local area, just open up to that. Even if it doesn't seem obvious, just be looking out for that, because you can really benefit and other people can really benefit from having these types of relationships. All right. So grower clusters, I've mentioned it so much, here we are. So sharing equipment and regional knowledge is so essential in farming in general. It's something I'm super passionate about. We have a lot of a decent amount of volunteer help, especially in the spring with pruning here at the blueberry farm. And especially for harvesting elderberries, you can do the pruning. You will do the pruning when it's dormant in the winter, so you have a lot more time. Labor for harvesting, you got to get out there, especially if you got spotted wing Drosophila, you got birds, it's like a lot of stuff that wants to get at those elderberries. You got to get out there before they go bad. If the elderberry variety is not totally precocious, meaning if the berries shatter off of the cyme, off of the plants when they're too ripe, there's all these things that you just got to get out there. So labor for harvesting is just a great aspect of grower clusters. Let's say you got 2 other farmers in your area, you guys can do a lot together. Just book out that 2 weeks. We're doing elderberry, we're helping each other out, and finding a buyer together, stuff like that. Everything becomes so much easier. Mostly everything. Relationships are, of course, a dynamic thing to manage. But destemming and storage, this picture here these are flowers, of course. This is in Terry's elderberry destemmer, also known as TED. That's the $8,000 machine, which pays for itself for sure. It's very loud, very shaky, but destemming and storage. So getting that stuff off the cyme, which is the structure, that umbel that the flowers and fruit are born on, and getting them free of the stem, free of other bits and pieces, so it's just that specific product that your buyers are getting. And by having that high quality product, no matter what it is, whether it's a raw material like this, whether it's processed, just having that high quality product is, of course, essential to having repeat business and referrals. Funding and education, I can't say enough good things about the Savannah Institute. Keith and Kevin and David Bruce, all these amazing people. There are a bunch of amazing women who work there who I just haven't talked to. So it's just a really great group, and they've gotten a ton of funding recently to really dive deep on figuring out logistics for elderberry in the region. And they also did a really cool feasibility study of hazelnut for the upper Midwest as well. And cooperative organization, this is I forget the name of this particular farm. This isn't an elderberry farm, it's just a really cool group of veggie farmers who banded together. But the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative, being for growers, by growers, is an amazing group. So I recommend checking out their website, which I'll talk about, or I'll just list it in a couple slides. So many benefits. I hope I've impressed upon you. Even if you're an introvert, it's just, once you start talking about something you have a common interest in with somebody, these grower clusters can come along, especially if somebody sees, oh, Jim and Sue or Sue and Ann and whoever were successful nearby. Somebody else might want to start growing in your area. You might have to be the first. But you're not alone, because there's people like Terry at River Hills Harvest who will not only buy berries at a fair price, but he teaches about it. He's starting an online mentorship program. And he used to do in-person mentorship, but of course with COVID he can't do that anymore. So he's doing some amazing work, and he was the guy who really got this going. There's the Facebook groups as well. I'm out here doing my thing, and I'm super excited to help you out and talk. Like I said, sharing is my jam. I really seek to help build this movement on generosity. And I'm really excited that I'm here at a time when that's really a potent thing and is being so well received. So most things are a lot easier and more fun when we're in community together. It's the way of the past, and it's the way of the future for successful small farms and startup farms. And we need each other as part of that whole farm ecosystem. It's not just about a holistic management process. Holistic management is cooperative management, cooperative input and experience. So, while we're doing a lot of things online, like I'm doing a lot of remote consultations and such these days, Terry's mentoring online, we are all accessible people. So gather info from us, gather info from people on the Facebook groups. It's New Elderberry Growers and Elderberry Growers Connect. I would suggest New Elderberry Growers is going to be the place where you're going to get the most, like, okay, how do I get started information? And finally, wrapping up here, some important points. This is I'm just over the moon about this crop, if you can't tell already, and its real benefit across so many areas, from human health to environmental to economic, and it's just my jam, pun intended. And it's a great fit for small farms who have the right situation and conditions. If you've got some extra space or can make extra space that time of year, mid to late August through mid-September, when those different varieties might be ripening. And if you have access to some existing resources, including your own will to let the universe help you make things happen, or God, whatever, some really great stuff can be, really deep fulfillment can be found with this crop. So there's a lot of organizational support and growing institutional support for this as well, depending where you are. University of Vermont's done some stuff, University of Missouri for sure, and there's different groups around the Midwest especially, but depending on where you are, feel free to reach out to me at my email below. I'm also starting up a regular blog. I have like one post there right now at artisanenvironments.com. That's my website. And I will be starting up the elderberry phase of my podcast as well. I've been doing my podcast for small business owners, especially landscape designers, in the past, and that's a big background of mine aside from degrees in ecology and landscape architecture. So if you want to get some free overview of really breaking down this process, I have a free elderberry startup email series that you can sign up for at the elderberry tab at artisanenvironments.com. Super excited to be offering that. The Savannah Institute has an amazing YouTube channel, and Terry and Chris just did some great interviews. Another woman named Elle from Lily Springs Farm just did an awesome talk on elderberry production as well. Experienced elderberry farmer with I think she has a focus more on the herbal medicine stuff, which is fascinating. Chris Patton can be found at midwest-elderberry.coop, an amazing man. I almost killed him in my car because my strut broke on the highway, and that was the whole thing. We still got to our talk. We have some memories together, Chris and I. And then Terry Durham, riverhillsharvest.com. Terry is a freaking wealth of information, and I just interviewed him for an article I'm writing for the Moses Organic Broadcaster. It's a Midwest publication for farmers, and he's the busiest guy, but he spent 45 minutes on the phone with me. Just like, I downloaded like 20 years of farming knowledge from him. He's awesome. But send me an email. I'm always learning. I'm always interviewing farmers. I'm always helping other people. My motto these days, or my modem, is help one person daily. So hopefully you can be that person. Just reach out. Yep. So let's take some questions if you got them.
Awesome.
Pete, that was awesome. Stay on that last slide for a second, because I want to point out something to everybody. Back up one slide there, where it's got there you go. Everybody, he doesn't have his website name anywhere there, but it is down with his email address. And you see Pete at artisanenvironments.com. So the website is artisanenvironments.com.
Yep.
So you'll have that right there. Way early in the presentation, you talked about John, and Joris asks, can you please repeat his last name? He didn't get the last name there.
John. Do you remember the subject I was talking about?
It was very early on, first or second slide.
John Eichard. Oh my gosh, his stuff is so inspiring and just makes me feel good. John. I usually use Zoom, so I'm not super sure about typing it out, but IK, so India, Kentucky, Echo, Romeo, Delta, IKERD, Eichard. John Eichard is his name, and it's just johneichard.com, I think. But he's got a bunch of books and a bunch of articles, and he's an amazing guy. He gave the keynote speech at the Moses conference last year. So if you look up Moses 2020, Moses like the biblical figure, 2020 keynote on YouTube, you'll get his keynote, which gives, honestly, like a lot of his articles and stuff are just bottled up in that keynote. So it's a very passionately delivered, very beautiful talk. And so he focuses on sustainable farming and farm economics and bringing back the power to rural communities.
By the way, a little bit of an aside from the very end of the presentation, you used the acronym HOPE. I think I might own the web domain hope.net. I don't think we have hope.com, but because for the word economics, we have a site and there's a website, and I think it's one of those two. We haven't done anything with it in a long time, but it's help other people economically. So hope is help other people economically.
Yes.
So
awesome.
Anyway, a question from Tessa, which is, do you usually have to net the crop to protect from birds?
So often I do recommend that. Yeah, I didn't get into that much. But I do, I mean, you got to keep it in your budget because it can be important. There can be like NRCS EQIP grants, EQIP can potentially help with that. I know farmers who don't net, I know farmers who do. Once you get above a few acres, it obviously becomes pretty expensive and pretty intense to net, but it can really save your crop too. So it's something we're starting with that single acre, is going to be really helpful to understand what your needs are actually going to be. For netting the crop, there's a 5-acre farm called Blue Fruit Farm in Winona, Minnesota. And they, yeah, I said they're 5 acres, and they netted their whole area. They grow a bunch of different fruits. And so they used like 8-foot, no, they're taller than that. They're going to be like 12 feet above ground, those posts. And so they were able to use juniper posts, so they're not treated. And then it costs about 10 grand for the netting. They got some funding from, I think, EQIP to help with that for 5 acres. And of course, it's going to get holes and stuff, but it's gonna pay for itself.
This is totally an aside, but have you heard from any farmers, and this isn't just with elderberries, but that have had any luck getting the PPP grants or loans from the COVID situation? We actually got one here. We were able to get one for our business, but I just haven't asked anybody else whether they've been able to. So,
I haven't talked with anybody about that side of things. Most of the farmers that I talk to aren't hiring help. But I guess, somebody could probably, you could do the PPP for yourself as a sole proprietor or something too.
You actually can. So there is, the reason I mention it is that I think that the Senate just approved, so it's got to go through the House, but the next round of that grant process, so it's through the Small Business Administration. It is super easy to fill out, by the way.
Oh.
Cool. I mean, ridiculously easy compared to a lot of other SBA and other government types of grants.
Okay.
And I said the word grant because that's what it seems like. It's actually a loan of which typically 10% of it is a grant. So we got approximately $60,000, of which $6,000 was a total grant, so there's no repaying. The other $54,000 was a 30-year loan at 2% interest with deferral of payment for the whole first year. So our payments begin, I think we got it in April, begin in April of 2021, and they're like $221 a month on a $54,000 loan. And it's not secured by anything. It's a completely unsecured loan. Now, I would never recommend defaulting on a loan, but the reality is it was really a sweet program, and one that I would recommend people begin to look at least if they want to.
That's good to know. Do you know if the interest accrual starts in that first year as well?
No, it does not.
Wow. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and it's got no prepayment penalties. You can pay it off in advance.
Nice.
Now, the reality is, I'm 68 years old, or 67. Will be 68 in a week. In 30 years, I hope I'm still alive. But the reality is, I can't believe that they made a loan to somebody who's, unlikely going to be alive when it's to be paid off with no security. So the reality is, to my heirs. Again, I'm not recommending you default on anything, but the reality is it'd be unlikely that they'd ever have to pay it. So several people have said, wonderful presentation, great job. I agree. I say the same thing. We'll give people just a couple more minutes to put any other questions in. Pete, was kind enough to stay on for us a little longer. I'm glad you didn't speed up. I'm glad we said that so that you could really take your time and get it
we would have missed a lot.
Yeah. By the way, the Savannah Institute, what an amazing organization.
Yes.
Again, Mark Shepard and his group, are very involved in that. Main Street Project, which you talked about, based in Minneapolis. I haven't kept track since we weren't able to have, any kind of an acres conference or anything in the spring. Hopefully we'll still be able to get something in the fall. Moses did happen, right? It happened in February.
It happened in February.
Yeah, before the pandemic.
I'm pretty sure I had COVID during that, actually.
Have
but it was a great conference.
Has Main Street gotten funding? I know they were struggling with that. Have they gotten their funding so they can move forward?
I'd have to ask my friend Will Crombie, who's involved with them. I'm more familiar with Tree Range Chicken, which is Will and Rahe. And Tony Wells are working on that together, which is separate from Main Street. So I can't tell you for sure. I'm guessing they did because I haven't heard anything about them struggling. But
yeah, well, I'll check with them about it. And then I'm not seeing any other questions. Again, several other people just putting many thanks in.
You're so welcome. Thanks for hanging out, guys.
In a couple of days, Mark will have the replay for this up on the site. And again, you've got Pete's email address at the bottom of this slide. His
I'd love to chat about
there also. So, do you have any other last parting thoughts before we end here, Pete?
This is really all about, like, life for me is all about just small steps daily. And if I can feel 51% like doing something, we don't have to give 110% every day. And that's way too much to ask of anyone, I think. I come from this really high powered, like, online entrepreneur lifestyle that I'm just changing the way I live my life. And the pandemic's been inspiration for that. And I'm lucky and fortunate enough, privileged enough, in a lot of different ways, socioeconomically, etc., that I can speak in this way about it. But if you can do one little thing each day to either get more clear on what's right for you or move forward on that project that you've been wanting to, that's what I've found brings me confidence, peace, and joy, and grounding, and deeper connection to the kinds of people, places, and things I want to be associated with. So I just leave with that. It doesn't take much to make a habit out of being fulfilled.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw out something that fits with that, because I agree. I've traveled one time by plane since March 6th, and I would typically be on a plane going somewhere every week or every 2 weeks at the week. And it has been, I have no desire to go fly for business again. I really don't. I mean, it's gone. I live on a gorgeous property where, frankly, I don't feel the need to leave very often. So it's, I'm blessed that way. But here's a couple things that I started doing that I had stopped doing. And I'm not going to make a lot of recommendations here. I think we might hold a webinar even on this some other time. But there are some amazing books, and they're almost all very old, that you can read that teach the kinds of principles you're talking about, slowing your life down, doing things. And one of them is How to Win Friends and Influence People, which was written back in the 1960s. And
Dale Carnegie.
Another one is Think and Grow Rich, which
Yes.
don't think of that as being growing rich necessarily economically. It just means growing rich in any way you might choose.
And Wayne, sorry to interrupt. I've been listening to that Think and Grow Rich audiobook. I've probably listened to it 7 times in the past 2 months. So it's definitely, very much on the same wavelength. And that richness is truly that universal quality of being of service.
And then one last little hint, because again, this is a little bit away from elderberries, but gosh, if you don't have one, find a mentor in your life that will fill you with things you believe are important from a coaching perspective. And a mentor is someone that you can go to with the deepest and darkest of your feelings and know that they're being shared confidentially. Know that the advice that you're going to be given, even though it might be tough lovish at some point, is truly from their heart. And it's something they don't expect that they're being paid for or anything. So, I mean, I can't ever recommend that enough. And I've been through periods in my life when I didn't have that circumstance. And I've been in many periods when I do. I'm in one right now. And it is just so fulfilling when you have that kind of circumstance. And then when you reach the point where you can mentor others, that's amazing too. And being able to have that ability. And you can do it with anything you have a specialty in. Mentoring comes in, again, you've got the elderberry specialty. I would say wild. I talked about Kate Armstrong before. She is so amazing.
Yeah, I'm excited to look her up. Yeah.
And wants to just mentor people on how they can, eat food out of cracks in the sidewalk in downtown Denver, or wherever they're at. So anyway,
may well be better nutrition than a lot of stuff in the store. You never know.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, everybody, thanks for hanging out with us for an hour and a half. Pete, thank you so much. Our next webinar will be tomorrow with Bob Christador. I'm not going to be there because of actually, you know what? Actually, my plans changed. I was going to be going to a dinner with my business partners, but I will be there tomorrow. So, Mark, that's news for you. I said I probably wouldn't, but Bob's talking about how we can, handle change in our lives. He's got a whole series he's going to do, and he's actually recording that into his podcast. It's one thing down the road, Pete. You can certainly use what you did here for your own podcast, because that's one of the things we do. We share all of our content with our speakers.
I love that.
But
thank you.
You might want to think about even doing your webcasts where you're doing them as videos, and then that's just more material for you. And it can be a video to yourself, but you're more than welcome, and we should talk more about this, to come on and do them even on our platform.
Oh, cool. Well, I've got a talk on perennial medicinal herbs that I'm putting together this fall, so we'll talk more.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that. And then, like you said, then you can turn them into podcasts and other things.
Yeah, cool idea.
So anyway, thanks everybody, and we'll hopefully see some or all of you tomorrow, and we have next week three or four webinars planned, and just keep on coming. Thanks, Pete. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Take care, everybody.